Welcome to With All Due Respect. This is a podcast for women over 40 who are looking for sane, frank advice about their health and wellness, especially through and after menopause. I'm Amanda Sahib, a personal trainer and nutrition coach, and the author of the best-selling book, Menopause: How I Learned to Thrive During Menopause and How You Can Too. I'd love you to join me every week as I chew the fat with some fab guests on hot topics that directly impact you. I also know the power of conversation is lost, and there's nothing better than sitting down for a natter with your mate and putting the world to rights. And that's exactly what I'll be doing with this podcast. We'll really get to know my guests, warts and all. I've made it my mission to help you by exploding a few myths and presenting you with plain, simple facts. These inspiring conversations will hopefully empower you to be a healthy, strong, resilient bitch, just like me. Before we get started, don't forget to hit subscribe and leave a review, and then visit me at amandathebe.com. And now let's get started on today's show.
Okay, welcome, Amanda. How are you?
Hi, and welcome, Jen. How are you?
So, listeners to this podcast may be actually listening to this on Amanda's podcast because we are doing something fun. We have been on each other's guest list since I launched my podcast a year ago. You were definitely on the list, and we've had kind of a funny time trying to connect between COVID and calendar miscalculations and sick kids. We've had a couple of reschedulings. So wherever you're listening to this, welcome. I know that we're both excited for this conversation.
It's so funny. We're just I do blame myself. I left the UK 23 years ago, 23 years ago. And for the life of me, I still can't get time zones right. So that's the first problem. I'm time illiterate when it comes to 7 hours, 6 hours. And I'm just oh, for crying out loud. So there was that. Then I had a trip in between to Peru, and then I got COVID, and then I lost my voice, and then kids got COVID, and oh my God, I was like, will we ever make this work? We've been chatting for more than a year, though, because we've been following each other. And one of the best stories I have about you, if I'm allowed to sort of gossip,
sure,
is because I think this is Amanda. Oh, holy shit, what's she going to say? So we're in the same space. We're talking to the same audience. We love that it's a shared space. I love the menopause world space. We're let's collaborate, get bigger and bigger and bigger as a group of women rather than fighting each other. And so we've mutually admired each other for a while. And there was something that you posted on your Instagram, I think it was about phytoestrogens and how you recommended them. And I just was like, oh, but why, Jen? Why do you recommend them when I don't think it's necessary? And it was one of those really great instances where it makes a difference if you take pause and you stop and go, I'm just going to ask her. And so I jumped into your DMs and went, listen, Jen, love you, everything you do. Why do you say this? What's your reasoning behind this? And we had the best conversation. And actually, at the end of it, we didn't even agree, I don't think. Not that I have a really hard stance on whether you're fucking tofu or not, but it just was we had this really great conversation. At the end of it, I thought, that's the way to do it, actually, isn't it? Instead of and I know I call people out all the time, but I don't. I actually call out myths and facts, and I don't personally attack people. I don't particularly get anything out of that, but I do get frustrated with false information. This wasn't false information. I just didn't quite understand where your mind was going with this one. And so it was just a really great experience for me. And I don't know, I respected you even more afterwards.
Aw, thanks. I remember that because I think that actually was our first conversation that we had. And I really liked how you approached it, saying, I don't understand this. From what I've read and understand, I have a different opinion, but I'm really interested in hearing yours. And in this online world of opinions about health and nutrition and everything, that is I think that's a missing piece of the conversations that need to be happening, because people will often slide into my DMs with their opinions. And they're usually not respectful, and they're usually not actually interested in understanding mine. So if I come out against keto, intermittent fasting, people love to tell me how wrong I am and why they think I'm wrong and tell me that I don't know what I'm talking about. But there's never the question, can you explain to me why? Or I should say rarely. And so
Actually, just read my caption, please, because I usually explain myself in there. Nobody ever reads the caption. And that's the bit we spend time working on, isn't it? We want to put like what we think is valid based on the data as we know it. You know what? Like, I agree. And most of the time, though, I think most people are respectful. Typically, I find in my world that if somebody says something that is an argument against me, it's normally a straw man argument. Like I had this post the other day about anti-inflammatory diets, how they're being heavily pushed towards menopausal women, and really there's not a lot of data behind them. And also just eat a balanced diet, because that is typically anti-inflammatory in its nuances, like in the type of foods that you eat, fruit, veg, grain, blah, blah, blah. And then somebody came on and started saying, yeah, but chronic disease is caused because of inflammation. And I'm like, well, that wasn't actually what I said. That wasn't the point of my post. And it's almost like apples are great. So what you're saying is you hate oranges and pineapples are the devil's fruit. And it's like, stop it, please. Just like, but then that's the world of social media. And so I never lose any sleep over any of this. I don't know if you do. I just think, well, it's fine. It's fine. We'll just keep doing what we're doing.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that when you put any information out there that you attach to your opinion, you have to expect that not everyone's going to agree with you. Of course, being in midlife, the great thing is that we don't really fucking care anymore. So you can disagree with me and that doesn't affect my day at all. But I think that what people are missing is that not everyone who has an opinion about health and nutrition and menopause deserves to say it publicly as if it is advice. Everyone's entitled to their opinion, but when you give an opinion to someone else as advice, people need to know that not everyone should. And this is where I think what you call wellness wankery.
I didn't adopt it, but it has become my moniker. Yeah. It's brilliant because it is wellness wankery. Back up your facts, please, and stop broad stroking us all as one.
Yeah. Sweeping generalizations are really big in the menopause world, especially with like HRT. People, yes, it's great. I love that people have the option for it, but it's not for everyone and it doesn't fix everything. And there's that nuanced middle of the road conversation that I think is missing from so many things, especially in this wonderful world of menopause.
Yeah, it's interesting. Actually, you sort of leads us on to the part of the conversation that we're sort of quite keen to get stuck into. And it's like, here we are, we're doing something that we never expected to be doing. These menopause advocates or educators as we are, like it was never on my bucket list, but there you go. But like it's not ideal at all, right? And you do a lot of work for education for women. I wrote a book and I'm trying to do more education especially in Canada with the company Naya that I'm working with. We desperately want women to feel respected and served. Like there's this big gap, this seismic gap. And so, I mean, we're getting there, we're making change, and I think we're striving forward. But like in your ideal world, what would it look like right now for you? Like for a woman in menopause right now or someone coming up into menopause? It's a massive question, open-ended, but that's good because I want us to sort of like say, like, if we had a Christmas list, dear Santa, I've been good all year. This is what I would like. Yeah.
Yeah. I think one of the big things that I talk to women about is that you need to be prepared for midlife in the same way that you would prepare yourself for pregnancy or any major life change. And for so many women who are entering midlife, they don't even have that on their radar. And so I always say that menopause has almost felt like a reproductive afterthought because it doesn't have consequences for the next generation. We're not talking about someone who is trying to have a baby, or there's no kind of immediate need to talk about it. So it's often either by the women themselves or their healthcare providers. And so what I would love to see on my wish list is like some kind of public health measure that's not driven by industry, that's not driven by grassroots organizations of women trying to move this forward, but a real public health strategy that says, hey, if you're 35, like on a bus stop, do you know that you could go into menopause in the next decade? Are you ready for that? That is really talking about, okay, this is what you need to know about nutrition. This is what, big picture, obviously, this is what you need to know about movement and strength training in your bones, so that women are getting to midlife prepared and not taken by surprise. That would be at the top of my wish list.
And to me, like I've said this before, like if you go to your doctors, and most people go once a year or once every 2 years just for a check-in, here's where I am. There should be, just like you say, like to me, it's like, give someone a leaflet, give a woman a leaflet that just goes, hey, and I think 35 is the perfect age as well, by the way. And I think it sort of fits in really nicely with sort of, we know that from a fertility standpoint, 32, 33 is sort of when our fertility starts to sort of dwindle. For anyone who's like trying to get pregnant, they'll probably understand that. And then as we're sort of 35, menopause does not feel tangible, especially when it's potentially 48, 49, 50, whatever, that people are going to go into menopause. It doesn't feel tangible. It didn't for me when I was in my early 40s, but I don't fucking care, right? I think that if you have a leaflet lying around, chances are you're going to browse it, or you're going to have like see the word menopause and go, oh yeah, that's a thing that's going to happen to me, which is way more than I had. Like if I even had the idea that like the shit I was going through was something hormonal and was expected, and the feeling I had when I understood that what I was experiencing perimenopause was pure anger. I was furious, like fucking livid. I left the doctor's office and I was like kicking bins as I was walking down the street going, what the fuck? Excuse my language, I'm really going for it. Like I had like 2 years we're both Canadian-ish. So like Canadian-ish. And I was in the Canadian medical system, really great doctors, like amazing neurologists, ear, nose, throat doctors, but they clearly weren't that amazing because they missed like big picture of what was going on because they didn't know likely. But I was like, this is just plain wrong. And if I've gone through this as someone who spent nearly 2-3 decades in the health and wellness industry, not having a clue what's going on, how's Joanne down the street going to feel who doesn't like pick up magazines and doesn't have an intuitive sense of what's going on in a body? Like it's just plain wrong. And so that's sort of my movement and like introduction into this space came because I just felt like it was a massive wrong that had been done. So how
old were you? How old were you when you went into menopause?
So it's all retrospective, isn't it? And even when I wrote my book, I wrote an age down, and then looking back, I'm like, is that right as well? Like I've had to keep going back because, everything's a bit fuzzy. But my last child was born. I only have 2, by the way. My last son was born when I was 38, a little bit older, I suppose. And then things never felt quite great after that, but they didn't feel bad either. It was just like meh. I felt a bit meh a couple of times a year, and then it just started being monthly, and I just always felt like whenever I had my period, which started to get shorter, that I always had a cold, and I felt like I was always like getting a sore throat and getting allergies and stuff, and it was just really odd. And then it went as soon as I got my period, and I'm like, well, that's a definite connection, but didn't do anything about it because it was just one of those things you deal with, right? Who cares? But then I think I was like in about 42 and I really got walloped with symptoms, like life-altering symptoms, and then put up with them for a couple of years. Well, I didn't. I tried to deal with them, but nobody really knew what it was. And so, about 42 and 48, 49 when I was menopausal.
Yeah. So, I mean, it sounds like you had a typical experience of so many people who go into perimenopause and don't know what it is. I sometimes get pushback against using 35 as the lower end of that, but it's really based on my experience because I'm 45. I'm 71 days away from my 1-year mark. It's my first.
Why would you say that? Oh, for Christ's sake. Oh my God. That's the type of shit you keep to yourself. Anyway, you ignore that. We'll cut that out. Okay, so.
No, I know. But it's the third kick at the can. So if it doesn't happen this time, you might see my head explode from across the ocean. But so I was, my last 2 kids who were twins were born when I was just shy of 33. And at 36, 37, so my kids were still young. I had 3 kids under the age of 7, and I started to experience really crippling anxiety. I wasn't sleeping. I was angry. I was irritable. It felt like my PMS was just like 2 weeks of the month.
I can't imagine you angry.
Oh my God. I hope my kids and husband don't hear this, because they would happily jump in and be like, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
But it was anger that was coming out of this like incredible discomfort that I couldn't even, like, it was crawling out of my skin is how I used to describe it. Like, I remember looking at my husband through tears and just saying, I am crawling out of my skin and I don't know what's wrong. And then my period would start and then it would get better. So everyone was just saying it was really bad PMS, and I had kids and work and life, and it was just everything was chalking up to life. And I also had a fantastic GP. I had a whole great team of integrative practitioners, but it took about 2 years. It was around 38 that someone went, well, could it be? And then after talking to my mom and realizing that both my mom and my grandmother were menopausal by 45, I thought, oh, this would have been useful information to know.
Yeah, thanks, Mom.
But it just hadn't come up. And so now when I tell people, even at like 30, hey, if you still have your mom, ask her, how old was she when she went into menopause? And if she went into menopause naturally, great, we can use that information. Many of them don't. But, I think that just even knowing that piece can have it on your radar. Because by the time that I hit 40, I was having hot flashes. And if I was still trying to figure out why, I'd be going crazy. So really kind of talking about that, yes.
Having it on our radar, that's all we're asking. Is that too much to ask? Is it?
It sometimes feels like it is.
It
Because
is.
there, to this day, and this happens weekly at least, someone will send me a message or an email or ask me a question and say, hey, I went to my doctor to ask if I could be in perimenopause. And they said that if I'm not having hot flashes or if I haven't missed a period, that I'm too young. And some of them are in their flippin' 50s. And I'm just like, how can anyone tell a woman in her 50s that she's too young to be in perimenopause? I don't get it.
And here's the thing as well, right? I don't know about you, right? So we've both had a very similar story and very typical. And even though it doesn't feel typical, it literally feels like this is, I don't know about you, but I personally, when I was in the thick of it, it impacted everyone around me, my children. I had those rages where it just came out of nowhere. I didn't even see it coming. My rages came when I didn't even expect them. I could have been like making cakes and having a great time with a kid, and then something dropped, and it was like one of those, I couldn't even describe it. It was awful, awful. I've said sorry so many times to my family, and they're just like, it clearly was something that was out of your control, and they're so kind about it. But it used to bring me to tears thinking about how angry I would get. And it wasn't, even though I'm feisty, I'm not a particularly angry person. And so when I was in the thick of it though, like my main things were migraine with aura, which gave me vertigo, nausea, and the migraines I'd lose feeling in my face and one side of my body. I literally thought I was having a stroke at one point. I couldn't work it out. And then depression. And I've never had mental health issues at all in my life. It came out of nowhere. And I've even had challenges in my life, which I don't particularly want to go into, but like I always felt like I was very pragmatic about things, probably a bit British and putting things in a box and packing them away as well, which isn't that healthy, I don't think. But whatever, it's how I dealt with things. And then everything, like when the depression, I didn't even know it was depression because I'd never experienced it, right? And so it was only when my gynecologist explained these things to me and how typical they were, I just was like, that's what made me angry. I was like, I nearly left my husband. Well, I didn't, but I wanted to. Every day I wanted to leave him. I just was like, God, I hate the way he breathes and looks and eats, and poor guy. And he was desperately there going, what can I do to help you? And I'm just like, die. But I didn't mean that, but just like, it was just he was too much. He was another thing for me to deal with. And I just kept thinking, if only I'd had like a little bit of an inkling, it wouldn't have been so seismic about this. But it's the words we use as well. And so like, that's sort of why I wanted to go to next. Like when women talk about their experiences. And we just said it's typical, but that's not diminishing anyone's like horrendous experience if it was like that. It's like when you hear the Menopause Society say things like, are your symptoms bothersome? Bothersome. I want to get that word and ram it down their neck, don't you? Yes, it was sort of bothersome. I really like lost my marriage and my mind over them. So I think even the language we use in menopause matters. And like, so I'm like you, watching other people and trying to like build this big tempest of women that are all going to talk about it. But I'm really concerned about the way the conversation is shifting somewhat. And I want to know what you think about that. Like, because I'm very clear on like my thoughts about the language we use and how we talk to women.
I don't know exactly what you're thinking, but because we didn't have any plan other than to try and chat. We had no outline of what we were going to talk about. But the thing that I don't find helpful in the conversation is when we talk, when not we, but when the bigger picture of we as a society talk about menopause as a disease. And that idea of that we are less than without estrogen. I think it is so important to talk about this as a natural, normal transition that we often need help getting through, that we can be thankful for the resources and support out there. But the idea that it's something that we need to treat as a disease and commodify, really is what it is, doesn't sit well with me. And I'm very much in support of helping women in any way that works for them. Absolutely no value judgments on what you should and shouldn't do. I want all women to have all options, but I don't want you to feel like you're less than if you don't do HRT. I don't want you to feel like it's a moral obligation to take hormone replacement therapy, but neither do I want you to feel like a failure if you do. I just want it to be around supporting choice.
Yeah.
But I don't like that messaging about it being a deficiency, because
Yeah,
I
that's
don't agree
that's
with that.
exactly what I was referring to, and I'm exactly the same. And I mean, and even by us saying it's a natural, expected physiological transition, isn't diminishing the fact that it can be rough. I mean, we both of us have just explained how incredibly terrible it was for us, right? Like life altering, and help is out there for you. It doesn't matter whether you decide to take the hormonal road or not, because there's plenty of us out there that can't do the hormonal road. And my main issue with the way that it has been, where the language has changed, and it's definitely changed because we've gone from women being ignored for long enough and refused treatment because of headlines that were meant to scare women, to going to the other side where women are thinking, oh, menopause, it's a deficiency. I'm deficient in my estrogen and I need to replace the estrogen that's missing. That's exactly what they're saying. And that isn't supported by the medical community, by the menopause societies. What they're saying is losing your estrogen and progesterone is bloody hard for some women. And so sometimes taking hormone therapy can ease that transition and make things better for you. If you're somebody like Jenn who went into the really early menopause, sometimes hormone therapy for a longer period of time can help be protective for your bones and your heart and even mental well-being. And so I've spoke to Dr. Hannah Short and Mandy Leonhard on that. They specialize in early menopause. Typically for most women, that they should be able to have that choice without feeling obliged. And when I go to Facebook forums where I see this, it's almost like cult like talking about hormone therapy is necessary because we've lost hormones, it really angers me. And I think that the documentaries that were produced in the UK are at fault for that. They weren't,
Yeah,
to
I
me,
think it
they
paints
weren't.
a really one-sided picture of it. And I don't know about you, but I often will hear from women who say, I started HRT and while it helped my hot flashes, it's made some things worse. And whenever we talk about any treatment, we have to do due diligence and talk about the side effects. And that is one thing other than the breast cancer conversation, which has dominated the side effect conversation, that we're not telling people. So I'm someone who's hormone sensitive, and I could not tolerate the hormones. I just couldn't. And in retrospect, I didn't tolerate the birth control pill in my 20s. When I was pregnant, I was not at my best.
Oh my God, you and I are exactly the same. Exactly
And
the
I
same.
thought I was crazy. It's like everyone loves progesterone. Why is it making me suicidally depressed?
Oh my God, the
and,
same.
and honestly, like
Oh,
and I love hearing other people talk about it because often people won't put two and two together. They'll just say, I didn't feel right. And they're not putting it together with that it's actually that we're hormone sensitive.
yeah.
And so hormones are not an option for me because I can't tolerate the side effects. And so many women are not told, hey, you know what? A percentage of women, and it's not zero, will feel like garbage when they take these. And just even talking about that as
I
it's
know.
not a one size fits all, it is not a panacea, and it's not for everyone, and that's okay.
And that's okay too. And unfortunately, I'm hearing now of lots of women who are told, just keep increasing, just to keep pumping and pumping outside of the medical requirements. And so I am a bit wary looking at what's happening. And I'm just constantly like trying to surround myself with really valid experts in that field and bringing it back to a really balanced place, because I meant to say to you, you know, like I'm definitely hormone sensitive, and it wasn't just progesterone, it was even the estrogen, because for a time I went on estrogen only under supervision of my gynecologist just to see if I had a response to that. It was all horrible for me. And in fact, it made my migraine so much worse that it took months for them to come, like to disappear. Oh, it was just the worst. The progesterone made me get suicidal thoughts to the point where my husband was going to take me into hospital. It was horrible, horrible. And I felt like I was failing. And then when I spoke to a colleague here who was part of the Canadian Menopause Society, she just said, well, what were you like on birth control? I went, well, I've never been able to do that. How were you pregnant? Oh, I hated it. I hated it, hated it, hated it. And I used to hate women that used to say, oh, I love being pregnant, because I would be puking and thinking, why? Why do you like this? And then the baby would pop out and instantly I felt, oh, I feel fine now. It was like the most bizarre thing. And I hear this more and more now. And even
Yeah.
normalizing that conversation is helpful for me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I feel like it's important to always balance things out. And so I always want people to know that there are some real upsides to menopause and midlife too. I mean, you and I spend a lot of time kind of in our day to day work supporting women, educating women through the challenging parts. But when you get to the other side, and again, I'm sure I'm jinxing myself, but the last 6 months for me have been probably the best 6 months of the last decade. Everything that has been on the roller coaster, mood, sleep, memory, all of it has normalized. Where I feel like my mental mojo is back, my sleep isn't as unpredictable and finicky. Everything just feels like, okay, I've kind of hit this new normal and it's not all over the place now. And to use the words that I hear so often, I'm starting to feel like myself again. The parts of me that I recognized from the before times are now coming back in a way that feels familiar. And I think it's so important to recognize that just because you're going through years of not recognizing what you see in the mirror, not feeling like yourself, feeling like a different person in your relationships and your day-to-day life, that doesn't mean it's going to last forever. It really does get so much better. And I don't know what your experience is, but I hear that from so many people that, oh my goodness, perimenopause was the worst. Menopause is okay. Like it's not
Seeping out of your skin anymore.
Yeah, it's not. And you just kind of get to this new normal and it feels good again. It
Well, I
feels
think
like,
that that's it. It's a new normal. That's how I would describe it. And I was the same as you. Like I'm now 52, so like 4 years potentially. I am not particularly counting for post-menopause. And I honestly think that by the time I turned 50, I was like, oh, I'm not having those thoughts of like waking up. So it was actually a couple of years after postmenopause. And I do hear medical experts talking about the 3 to 5 year window after menopause where like the transition starts to normalize again, like the burden is lessened somewhat. Dr. Lisa Mosconi sort of verifies that in her work as well, right? I got a brain scan from her and she told me my brain was big, fat, and juicy again. And I was like, that's all I need to hear. I don't need to know the medical terms. That was exactly the word she used. And I even felt that personally, right? So I remember waking up, I think maybe like 46, 47. And I remember having this conversation with myself that literally then I physically went out looking for a way to flip the switch, because I woke up and thought, I can't be this person. I can't wake up feeling like this anymore. Is this what I'm destined to be? I always felt like the one thing I had going about me, I've got a few things going about me, but the one thing that I always liked was like my energy is positive, and I can rally people around, and I've got like a good attitude to life. And and that's the bit I'd lost. And I just was like, where did you go? Right.
Yeah.
And part of me had been sucked into all of my symptoms and my depression and stuff like that. But by this time, and I'd failed doing the hormone therapy, and I just was in a really shitty place. And then so I started doing the work myself. So it really does require it required from me a lot of effort. That's when I started looking at like the work on how to build like a resilient mindset, like how to start working towards my values and my strength, how to start recognizing what my strengths were, how to start recognizing the values that were really important to me. And actually, that was one of the things that solidified. I do actually like my husband a lot, and I do actually love my kids more than anything else in the world and would die for them. It sort of reignited that. So I started doing the personal work that was harder than anything I've ever done before, harder than working out and harder than eating well, like being truly honest with myself. And then just as the symptoms eased off, and I'm definitely now in a place where I feel like it shouldn't be a radical act to say, hey, guess what? It's good over here. We'll come over, cross the Rubicon and come and join me, because actually I'm maybe not the same person I was in my 30s, but I actually prefer the person I am now. I've got less hang-ups. I do still give a little bit of a fuck, but not as many as I did. I definitely choose my battles wiser. I feel like we should be sat in a tent smoking a pipe, and people should come and ask us for like sage advice, because I honestly just feel like in a much better place and at ease. And it's something that feels really quite good. And that shouldn't be like, when I ever talk about that, I almost feel like I'm like, it's a wild, bold statement. And yet
I
we
know.
know from studies, the U curve of happiness. I
Yes.
talk about that in my book,
Me
that women,
too.
it's such an amazing, from Stanford University. And they talk about how after the age of 50 upwards, women are the happiest, like the happiest they are in their lives. And it's got to be
Yeah.
a reason for that.
Yeah, I've talked about that U-shaped curve before as well, and especially around that we're in this pleasure deficit. And often like this U-shaped curve of midlife in our 40s, early 50s coincides with perimenopause, coincides with all of these really busy life stages, sandwich generation, work, all the things.
Kids.
It's like
Yeah.
all the things are just like converging on us. And it's just hard to feel like you can catch a break. It's hard to feel like you can ever like relax and exhale. And you combine that with perimenopause and the roller coaster of estrogen and progesterone, and how we know that that affects mood and coping and all those things. And it's really easy to see how you can get in this hole of this funk of like, oh my God, this sucks. And feeling like you're never going to come.
But it's hard
Um,
though. And we both recognize it's hard. We both looked in the mirror and gone, really? This is it? Oh, and it's tough.
Yeah. But I totally agree with you. I'm not quite as post as you are, but I definitely, like I said, in the last 6 months have felt a shift. And I feel like, okay, this is good. And I see good things.
And breathe.
I can start. I think I'm on the other side of that curve. But yeah, I think that just talking about that as a normal life stage, and we do that with other life stages. Like we tell girls who are going through puberty when they're at the height of all the raging hormones, like it's not always going to be this bad. We tell new mothers, new parents with newborn babies who aren't sleeping, you'll get through this, it'll get better. But we tell women in midlife, yeah, it's over. The best is over. The rest of your life is just going to be blah. And it's like, no, it's not. You need to know that this is just another transition. Your next season can be your best, but you have to believe that that's possible.
Yeah.
So believe us when we say that it's good things are coming.
Good things are coming. Good things are coming. And we haven't even touched on the ways that, and we won't in this podcast now. Maybe we'll do another one, like of the things that you actually can sort of harness and take control of, right? There's plenty of things that women can do to make this like a really valuable time for living. And when people say you've got like a third of your life in, I'm like thinking, well, actually it's more like half of your life a lot of the time, because women are going through it in their 40s and most women live till they're 80 statistically. So you've got a good half of your life. There's no way you're going to need to struggle and suffer through that at all. So it's really disingenuous to talk to women like that. And so I'm glad that we're both the ones trying to sort of like put some reason back into the conversation. And so
Yes.
we were going to touch on this as well, but not in too much depth. But, you know, I'm from the northeast of England. People just say it like it is. They do. And I've had to rein that in a little bit. I'm a little bit sweary. I don't mind that. I'm a little bit crusty. I don't mind that. And feisty too. I'm also kind. And I recognize that when I say things that don't come from a place of hate, I haven't got the energy for that. You're not too different. But what's interesting is you're Canadian. So how does that work? How does being a straight shooter, no nonsense person be if you're from Canada? Eh?
Well, maybe it's the East Coaster in me. Maybe it's because I'm from Halifax. I've got some saltiness from the sea. Yeah, I mean, I think that like so many women, and I was a people pleaser. I was one of those people that I just wanted to do the right thing, make sure that people were happy, and I realized that that was taking a toll. And again, one of the beauties I think of midlife is that it really does strip you down and you get a shakedown of what actually matters and why, and what do you want to continue with for the next half of your life. And making other people happy wasn't at the top of that list anymore. And I
But
really,
I hear you though, because a lot of us are like that. I don't know if it's like a trait that a lot of us have. And also, not like my husband has this really great ability to not care if people like him or not. I don't get
yeah,
it because I don't like it when people don't like me. And
I
that's
know.
been hard to deal with, but it's getting easier because I've realized there's a lot of people don't like me. So,
Yeah. And I mean, I definitely, as a people pleaser, I had like rehab to do around that, especially when I decided that I wanted to have a voice in this midlife space that wasn't towing the conventional line, especially around nutrition. Like to have the resiliency when people disagree with me, to be able to realize that that's okay and I don't need to care. I don't need to convince you of why I'm right, because I very firmly believe in what I believe in, and that's okay. But I think that being a straight shooter means that your opinion is going to be unpopular sometimes, because it's not sexy to be a straight shooter. It's not sex sells, but so does fad diets and the extremes and the quick fixes. And that's not what I'm about. And so I think that when people sometimes hear my message, like the best compliment I ever get is when someone says, "You're so normal." I
yeah,
love that because
yeah.
to me that really embodies what I want people to know about food and nutrition, is that common sense can actually provide you with a very solid framework for making decisions about food.
Actually, I was going to say to you, though, you said I'm not conventional. And I'm like, but actually, that is actually your strength. You are conventional. It's the opposite. And that shouldn't be radical, like we've said before. But for some reason, towing the line and saying, hey, stop, bring it back, because this is what we know. Your nutritional information is super common sense, super conventional. It's like basic. And that's what mine is too, because we know it works. And that's often one of the reasons that I will be a little bit outspoken, because I'm tired. Like we'll see people out there taking a tiny bit of truth, maybe using their appeal to authority. There's a lot of times that doctors will jump in on nutritional conversations using their doctor status, but without having sort of a ton of nutritional sort of like education behind it, and then using that appeal and then a tiny bit of truth and then just filling the rest in with bullshit. And that's what drives me crazy. But I thought that they were fine. I thought that they were great because they said this and this. Yeah, that's true. But then the other 80% is just misleading you because they have a diet to sell that actually results in everything that they've just cherry picked or used their bias against, or supplements. And so that's just the type of things that I get frustrated with. But to me, that's being the no nonsense straight shooter and just saying it's okay to stop back and even asking, where's your data? Why would you say that? What's the reasoning behind that? It's okay to ask those questions.
Yeah, absolutely. So I love this conversation. I think that we need to plan another one at some point for part 2, where maybe we can more specifically talk about some of our passion projects around this area, but I've loved sharing our story. So I'd love for us to be able to share what we think are the missing ingredients or the missing ingredient in midlife or menopause, whatever you want to say. I'll let you go first.
I always feel like this is a really lame answer because I say it all the time. I remember being on the CBC radio and I did a syndication for every province, and it was really great. And at the end of it, they asked me the question. It was trying to do menopause awareness and just putting it on the radar, like you said. And they were like, what's the one thing you want all women to have? And I'm like, knowledge, of course. Just to know about it. Is that too much to ask? And so it comes back down to it. You don't need to be an expert. You just need to have the awareness. And there's tons of resources out there. Jen and I provide tons. On my website, I've got just one page that's just menopause resources. I've written a book. Jen's got courses. There's tons of us out there. Just ask us if you're not sure. We're happy to point you in the right direction.
And I do that all the time. People will reach out to me, and if I can't work with them because of regulatory issues or whatever, I always have people that I can refer to. So there's always people that you can trust that you can get to. The big missing ingredient that I love to encourage people to explore is community, because we parent our children in isolation. We have these small nuclear families, and now we're going through midlife in isolation and it's changing. We're part of the bigger community, but I think we really need to normalize talking about maybe these pieces of our experiences that other people might feel less ashamed about if they knew that it was happening to other people. So just creating that community of sharing and support and understanding and just normalizing this normal transition.
And the studies back that up as well. I mean, the studies out there that even show, one was specifically for hot flashes, that when somebody shared their burden and created a community space, it reduced the incidences of their vasomotor symptoms, which at first you're going that doesn't make sense. Well, it does, because stress is one of the underlying factors to do with our symptoms as well. And so any way you can reduce the burden and talk. I mean, it shouldn't have to be a taboo topic, and talking about it at the table is fine. My kids will often go, "Oh, is it menopause, Mom?" Yeah. Go fuck yourself.
Oh yeah, my kids, especially my 12-year-old son, is the most educated 12-year-old male out there on hot flashes, let me tell you.
Hooray, hooray. And that's how it should be. Jen, this has been brilliant.
Yes, thank you so much. And so, you might be listening to this on my podcast, you might be listening to this on Amanda's, but we're glad that you joined us and hope that this conversation has maybe just added a little bit to your menopause bucket today.
Yeah, I hope so too. So when the Midlife Feast met, with all due respect, we had a great conversation. Thank you, Jen.
Thanks, Amanda.
Thank you so much for listening to the show. If you like what you hear, then why not subscribe to this podcast and leave me a review? You see, when you do this, it helps to raise the profile of my show and attract new listeners. And it also allows me to continue to deliver valuable content with great guests. And in return for you doing that, I will send you my 12-week core-focused program called Abs on Fire as a thank you. Simply drop me an email at amanda@amandasahib.com and I'll wing that your way. Bye.